Isn't this room amazing? Just amazing. Good morning and welcome. I'm Natalie Jacobson, a longtime reporter here in Boston. And I think it's extraordinarily wonderful that we have something called a Women's History Month. That wouldn't have happened a long time ago. Just briefly, I graduated from college in the mid-'60s, the first in my family to do so. And getting anyone back then to give you even an interview for a job, much less a job, was quite rare. So back then, we women argued, hey, we're just as good as the guys, you know, we're equal in intelligence, knowledge, ability, and now that we've been educated, also in education. Now, back then you could be a school teacher, a secretary, or a nurse. Nothing wrong with that, but if you chose something else, you had a hard time. Now, here we are today, 2016, and still in my old lifetime. We have a woman, the likely nominee of her party for President of the United States. We have 20 women senators, which is extraordinary. And we have 104 women congresswomen. How about that? I would imagine that the young women here in this audience would find it hard to relate to some of what took place in our lifetime, in your mother's and grandmother's lifetimes. For example, I was the only woman at WCVB in the 70s for 2 years in a journalistic capacity. The only other women were secretaries. Today, it's very different. There are two things, however, that you can relate to, you young ladies especially, who are here today, because they are your challenges to meet. The main reason that we women were denied employment back in those days was concern that when we had children, we would quit. It's illegal to so discriminate today. I had people say to me, I'm sorry, we've just never hired a woman and we're just not going to. But today, as working mothers, we know very well the challenges that we face to do it all. I have to tell you that a lot of you can relate to this. It seems like every hour is a big compromise. That's your issue too. Secondly, we women have come to a time when we dare to speak of the differences that we bring to the table as women. And I look forward to hearing from some of our panelists and how gender might bring you a different perspective and how it might affect the way you think about policy and about legislation, and how does that benefit our country? I had the privilege since the 70s of interviewing the candidates running for president as they made their way through the Granite State. They were all eager to talk to Boston reporters. After the election, they wouldn't answer the phone, but you can understand that. I also had the privilege of covering the national conventions starting in 1980 in New York City, when Senator Edward Kennedy delivered one of the greatest political speeches I have ever heard. I remember reporting the mood of that great hall as electric. He concluded his speech bowing out of the race. For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die. Many thought if he had spoken like that during his run, he might have been the nominee. So it is my pleasure and honor to introduce the co-founder and the president of the board of directors of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, the senator's widow and a true leader in her own right, Victoria Reggie Kennedy.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Natalie, and good morning to all of you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. We gather this morning to celebrate Women's History Month by bringing together some of the most impressive and accomplished women that I have ever met. But before we get started, I hope you'll join me in a moment of silence for our late First Lady, Nancy Reagan. Thank you. The mission of the Kennedy Institute is to encourage Americans to participate in our democracy, to invigorate civil discourse, and to inspire the next generation of citizens and leaders. We might just be mission accomplished after this incredible program today, as we hear from an extraordinary group of leaders, current and former United States senators, Massachusetts senators and state representatives, the president of the Boston City Council, other leading council members, and our current and former Massachusetts treasurer. Groundbreaking women journalists will moderate our panels. In the audience, we're also joined by women who share a commitment to making a difference. I must mention Barbara Lee and the outstanding work she does to nurture and encourage women in political life. And Swanee Hunt, who has dedicated herself to making sure that the vital voices of women are always heard. Therese Murray, our former Massachusetts Senate President, the first woman to hold that leadership post, and a visionary leader who understood and believed in this institute from the very beginning. Terry, it's so great to have you here. And Angela Menino, the former First Lady of Boston, the woman who taught me everything I know about campaigning, who taught me how to ask people to vote for my husband. Angela, I am so happy that you are here. Thank you. Thank you. We also have additional elected officials and many others in the audience who have worked to advance the leadership of women in our society. Thank you all for your service and for being here. It's now my great honor to introduce someone who truly needs no introduction in this room. She made a powerful speech on racial justice right here, just a few months ago. She's a champion for those whose voices would not otherwise be heard. She's a woman who makes history this month and every month, a leader with an unwavering dedication to our Commonwealth and to our country. Let's welcome her now, our senior senator and the first woman elected from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. Wow, thank you. I see you up there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Vicki. Most of all, thank you for your good advice. Thank you for your friendship for so long now. You know, it is great to be at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. Senator Kennedy had the idea for this institute because he realized there was not a single place in America dedicated to the study of the Senate. And he believed that by educating students and teachers and elected officials and the public about the Senate, that we could inspire the next generation of public leaders, men and women. And nothing epitomizes that vision more than this leadership conference today. I believe that Senator Kennedy is smiling down at us. So we owe him a great debt for being here. As the first woman elected to the Senate from Massachusetts, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Women in Leadership Conference. I have to say, I wish this conference had existed 5 years ago when I was thinking about running for office. Back then, the single most frequent piece of advice I got is don't do it. It was the plurality. It wasn't necessarily the majority, but it was the single piece because people kept saying to me, Massachusetts was not ready to elect a woman senator. Well, all I can say is they're not ready until you get out there and ask them. So that's what we did. But look, I had a lot of doubts. But trailblazers like Patty Murray and Barbara Boxer and Jean Shaheen and Barbara Mikulski told me that I could do it and told me that if I would get out there and try, they would be with me every step of the way. And I just want to say, Barbara Mikulski was good to her word. She came to Massachusetts, she got up on the stump for me, and she helped make it happen, and I am very grateful, Barbara. You were there. And now, in the Senate, women don't just have a seat at the table, we're leading the discussion. And I made a list because it's now long enough that one might accidentally forget someone, and I didn't want to do that, but I want everyone to hear this. Lisa Murkowski is now the chair of the Energy Committee. Maria Cantwell is the ranking member on the Energy Committee. Barbara Boxer, ranking member on the Environment Committee. Dianne Feinstein, ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. Patty Murray, ranking member on the Help Committee. Jean Shaheen, ranking member on the Small Business Committee. Susan Collins, chair of the Aging Committee. Claire McCaskill, ranking member on the Aging Committee. And Barbara Mikulski, ranking member on the Appropriations Committee. Now, I gotta say, that's women in leadership. Women in leadership. And it's not just about individual leadership, it's about the issues that we get out and insist that our colleagues talk about. It's about paid family leave and fair scheduling. It's about student loans, minimum wage, equal pay, funding for medical research, access to health insurance, birth control, Social Security, and Medicare. When government has more women, more things get done, and more things get done for working families. Now, I have the privilege of introducing our first two speakers this morning, and I just want to make this as personal as I can, because our first two speakers this morning have taught me an enormous amount about being a senator and about being a woman in the Senate. My friend, Barbara Mikulski, is the longest-serving woman in the history of the United States Congress. Wow. Wow. She is also the very first woman elected to the Senate in her own right, and no better person could hold this title. She is the perfect combination of a tough mind and a good heart. And no one does more to lift up women's voices in and out of the Senate than Barbara Mikulski. Barbara has been an amazing mentor to every woman who's come through the Senate, and we all have our Barbara Mikulski stories, only a subset of which could be told in public. But Barbara's list of accomplishments is truly awe-inspiring. She led the fight for the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. She was a force to be reckoned with in the negotiations over the Affordable Care Act to make sure that women's preventive health was fully covered and that women didn't get charged more for health insurance just for being women. Thank you, Barbara. We appreciate that one. And she has led the Senate in fighting for medical research. When she announced this year that she was going to retire, she said she decided how she wanted to spend the next 2 years. And her statement was, do I want to spend my time raising money, or do I want to spend my time raising hell? And she decided to raise hell. Barbara, we're grateful. Now, while Barbara taught me, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, it was Susan Collins who taught me the importance of bipartisanship and compromise. And I know I'm not always the easiest student, but that's on me, it's not on Susan. One of the Senate's most bipartisan senators, Susan has led on funding for diseases like diabetes. She's been an amazing leader in the Senate. She's reached deals to end Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and to keep our government from shutting down. Just the other week, she held a terrific hearing on common sense solutions to the opioid crisis. You know, I watch Susan every day, and I see that she does what she believes is best for the people she represents, and not for the powerful interests, not for those who can wield the most influence in Washington, but for the people she represents. And for that alone, my respect runs deep all the way down, and I try very hard to learn every day from Susan Collins. Susan also quietly works her tail off. In September, she cast her 6,000th vote in the United States Senate. Is that a stunner? She has not missed a single vote in 18 years. It's amazing. Now, I don't often agree with Mitch McConnell, but I enthusiastically agree with him when he said, "I'm not sure a surgery, a tsunami, or the most wicked Maine nor'easter could stop this woman." Which I think is exactly right. They can't stop her, and we don't want them to stop her, because Susan is truly remarkable. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. So that's what this conference is about today. You know, now that I am the senior senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I spend a lot of time just out and around, and I meet a lot of little girls. And I make a real point when I meet little girls to get down on their level, and to reach out and to say to them, you know, look them in the eye and say, "My name is Elizabeth, and I ran for the United States Senate because that's what girls do." And then we do pinky promises. I just want to be clear this morning. That's what girls do because of women like Susan and Barbara, who helped make sure that girls had a chance to do it. So thank you both very much. Thank you. Barbara?
Good morning, everybody. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here at the Edward Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. I was here this time last year when this wonderful institution was open. It was a cold, cold day. I froze my little snuggies off, but it was a warm-hearted day to see how one of the great icons of the Senate would be not only celebrated and commemorated, but his memory would be used as a teaching tool for the next generations. And I think he would be so happy today to see this gathering, and I'm happy to be here. If you work for me in my office, you get a little green card, and it gives you my operating principles. I'm an organizer. I like to get things done. Don't mess with me. Let's just do it. But one of the things that it always starts off with is when you go into a meeting, you have to say to yourself, what is the point and what is the objective we seek? You have to have a purpose. When you work for me, it's called the strategic use of self. How at every meeting, every conversation, you're helping move an agenda. So let me tell you the objective that I hope for today. I hope when you leave here, particularly the young people, that you come to know the Senate in a different way. That you come as you look at the functioning of politics today, where the environment has become so toxic, so very toxic, almost like a Superfund site, that you leave and you think that the United States Senate is a place where, number one, the Constitution gives them unique responsibilities, different than the House. Advice and consent, one of the most important of those. Ratification of treaties. But also by law and tradition, it is a place for conflict resolution, not conflict ferment. And then when you think about it even farther, you think, what a great place to be. Maybe I'd like to be there one day, but whatever it is, I want to be involved in the political process. I think I can make a difference, and when we work together, we could make change. That's the objective we seek at being here today, and that women make a difference. Massachusetts has given us great senators, John Kerry, and of course, the legendary Ted Kennedy. We now have Ed Markey there, who I'd served with in the House of Representatives. And then, of course, our very own Elizabeth Warren, who is really a groundbreaker, game changer. You know the rest. And we're delighted to see you, and thank you for those warm introductions. And then, of course, there's Vicki Kennedy, whose very determination really took what was a dream and turned this institution into what it is today. A leader in her own right, a champion for civil rights, a family who stood up as we commemorate so many anniversaries, whose family stood up when it wasn't not only easy, and not only was it, it was not easy, not only was it hard, but it was actually dangerous. And she saw her father, a judge in Louisiana, even risk his life so that people would have her opportunity, and has devoted her life to make sure no one's left out or left behind, whether it's in the law books or whether it's in law firms. So Vicki, we're glad to see you, and thank you for what you're doing. And I'm delighted to be here with my colleague, Senator Sue Collins, the senior Republican in the United States Senate. She's a close friend, a dedicated public servant, and a powerful ally. She is really something. And she's going to speak today in her own right, and you'll see our interaction. But Sue and I have known each other for a long time. She'll tell you when we first met, when she came to the Senate, and I ran one of my power workshops, and boy, did she learn lessons. This is someone who right now, chairing the Aging Committee in the United States Senate, teaming up with Senator Claire McCaskill. And if you look at them, they're very different in personality. They're very different sometimes in their voting records, but they're not different in protecting the seniors of the United States of America. And most recently, Senator Collins and Senator McCaskill published a booklet. Thank God for desktop publishing. If we had to go through congressional publication, we'd be on 12 more amendments to the Constitution. But I keep calling her Sue, Senator Collins and McCaskill have published this book, and I go to collins.gov, you'll tell them, Senator Collins, but on 10 ways that seniors are being scammed, from the IRS fraud, where you get a call that says, if you don't, this is the IRS calling, and if you're being sued by IRS, just give us your social security number, your credit card number, and your PIN number, and you'll be okay. 10 scams. She wants to get rid of the scum. She's doing it. She's doing it with Claire. They're doing it together. American seniors are going to be safer because of Collins and Mikulski and their groundbreaking work in making sure that we not only have laws, but you have news that you can use in your own communities to protect yourself. That's what we women do. We work on the macro issues, and we work on the macaroni and cheese issues to make sure we solve the big problems, but it goes to tools that people can use in the local community. Now, when I came to the United States Senate a really long time ago, they just finished building the pyramids, Mount Rushmore, and so on. But when I came to the United States Senate, there was only one other woman, and that was Senator Nancy Kassebaum of Kansas, from a legendary political family, a very esteemed person, and she welcomed me. You know what was so great about Senator Kassebaum? She did not judge me. And I make this as a lesson to take away. She did not judge me. Here comes Barbara Mikulski from Baltimore, a congresswoman, a city councilwoman, got into politics fighting a highway, a little unpolished, a little unvarnished, a little scrappy, very feisty, and extremely mouthy. And I'm in this very starchy institution, Senator Casimir, but very proper person, did not judge me. And she met me and said, how can we work together? And we had conversations. And I worked with her and worked with Senator Kennedy and then the Health Education Committee. I watched those two wonderful people work on the Kennedy-Kassebaum health legislation, which was a down payment that took us to Obamacare. And we worked together. We disagreed. I liked earmarks. She didn't. We did this, she didn't, but we stood together on so many things. And you know the way the story ends? She leaves the Senate, she retires, but she meets Howard Baker, another former senator, and guess what? They get married. Ted and I go to the funeral, the only two other senators invited. Nancy and Howard dance. They dance with their families. Howard comes over to me. Nancy goes over to Ted. We went out on the floor, and Vicki, this was maybe pre-you, we did the bipartisan boogie through the night. So that's what we did, and I learned from them the zone of civility. In 1992, there was only two of us until 1992, after the Anita Hill debacle, women came to the Senate. And I was determined that I would take and pass lessons on to what I had learned. And we welcomed them, and we were working together. And there was a senator from Texas, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson. Kay Bailey Hutchinson had a great career in Texas politics, had come to the Senate. And I got a call from her office saying she wanted to work with me on spousal IRAs. Back in those days, if you made a contribution to your IRA account, women could only make, if you were a full-time homemaker or worked at home, you could only give $500. But if you worked in the marketplace, you could give $2,000. Kay wanted to change it, and it's your own money. She said you should be able to give $2,000. So my staff said, Hutchinson's calling you. She wants to work together with you. Ew. Ew. What do you want to do that for? You know she's a conservative Republican from Texas. So, well, let's hear the idea. In the meantime, Senator Hutchinson's staff said, why are you calling of anybody Barbara Mikulski? You know how liberal she is, and on and on and on. But we got together. We found that we liked working together. And then we went out and had dinner just to talk our legislation over. And we had such a good time. We said, how about including others? And in 1994, the legendary dinners of women of the Senate getting together once a month began. So now, for over 22 years, on a regular basis, the women of the Senate get together. And we get together once a month to talk things over. We have 3 rules: no memos, no staff, no leaks. What happens at the dinner stays at the dinner, and there we are. And out of that has come a desire to have a zone of civility, that even when we disagree, that we don't do it in a way that demonizes, dehumanizes, disrupts the institution, that our debate will have intellectual rigor, we'll duke it out, but when the day is over, the day will be over. That has stood the test of time. The other thing we decided is we won't be a caucus, we're not doctrinaire, we aren't going to disagree on big matters, from choice to drilling in the Arctic. You know, Barbara Boxer is pure green. She doesn't want to drill anywhere, even in a dental chair. And then there's Lisa Murkowski, and then it was others who wanted to drill in the Arctic. That's okay, because what we agreed was we would disagree without being disagreeable, nor would we disrupt the institution. We would be game changers, but we would follow the processes. And guess what? It has worked. We have worked over the years where we have been a force, particularly in the area of women's health, particularly in the area of military sexual assault, particularly in terms of economic empowerment for women. We have disagreed on means, but we've always agreed on goals. When I was moving the Lilly Ledbetter legislation, the very first piece of legislation in the Barack Obama administration, Senator Kennedy was quite ill at the time, was the chair of the committee, and he asked me to take it up and to take it on, and I was ready. My shoulders were squared, my lipstick was on, and off we were running. But at the same time, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson had different ideas. We wanted to accomplish the goal. She offered 9 amendments on the Senate floor. We discussed it, we debated it, we argued it, we whatever. People said it was one of the most instructive debates they had heard on the economic situation of being a woman in the workplace. And when it was over, I liked it because I won. But you know what? America won. American women won. We really passed that legislation. And I will give other examples in the talk, but I wanted to show how when we work together, we do try to get things done. So I hope today you see what the lessons are. Don't judge. Try to have a zone of civility. Let's have also be a force. Where we can find some things we agree on, let's do it. And where we disagree, let's move a process forward where we can solve those problems. And one last story before I conclude. In 2014, Senator Ted Cruz led a government shutdown. This is not about him today. It's about Sue Collins and Amy Klobuchar. We were in a deadlock. We were in a gridlock. We were stuck. Government agencies weren't being paid. Researchers at NIH weren't getting their money. Border Patrol agents and all that. I was sitting on the Senate floor then as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, wondering how we could break this logjam. And then I hear this voice over to my right on the side where the Republican seat. 2 rows back stood once again a voice from Maine, very much in the spirit of Margaret Chase Smith. Senator Sue Collins stood up. She said, we've got to change this. She had 3 great ideas that she was putting forth. And as I looked over to the other side of the chamber, up stood Senator Amy Klobuchar, stood up and said, I agree with Collins. We have to end the deadlock. Here are our 3 ideas. Now, I chaired the Appropriations Committee. Their ideas were good, but it didn't matter that I agreed with the idea. I agreed that they were on something, they were about to change the tone. So I stood up and said, I support Collins Klobuchar in their effort to end the gridlock. They put together a tremendous coalition of other senators. It became a voting bloc where the leaders had to listen. Can you imagine leaders actually listening? And it was the Collins, led by Collins, supported by Klobuchar, the rest of us, that changed the tone that then changed the tide. If she had not stood up and then been supported by Klobuchar, who knows where we would have gone for how long. That's what we women do. Change the tone, change the tide, change history. That's what we're all about. Thank you, and God bless.
Good morning. Talk about a hard act to follow. First, let me thank Senator Warren for her extremely gracious introduction. It won't surprise you to know that she is a real tiger, a real force in Washington, D.C., representing the citizens of the Commonwealth. I also want to thank Vicki Kennedy for inviting me to join you today. I have a feeling I may be the token Republican here, but hey, I can handle it. This is truly a wonderful way to commemorate Women's History Month, and how marvelous it is to be in this extraordinary replica of the room in which we work and in which Senator Ted Kennedy served so well. So Barbara Mikulski is the Dean of the Women's Senate. When I was first elected to the Senate in 1996, here I was, a freshman from the state of Maine, a Republican, a person who did not know Barbara at all. And yet she was one of the first senators to call me up after I've been elected and to invite me, along with the other freshman woman senator, Mary Landrieu from Louisiana, to her power workshop. Well, I had no idea what a power workshop was, but it certainly sounded good to me. We went over, we went over to Barbara's office, and she taught us the appropriations process. Well, imagine being a brand new senator and having the master of the Appropriations Committee, or maybe I should say the mistress of the Appropriations Committee, teach you how to be effective. And after sizing me up for a few months, Senator Mikulski came to me and said, "You know, you have the heart of an appropriator. Get on the committee as soon as you can." And I followed her advice. So there's something very special to have the Dean of the Senate Women here in this room and to hear her talk about the lion of the Senate. It's like having a front row seat to history. I had the honor of serving with Ted Kennedy for 12 years, and we worked together on many issues, ranging from increasing Pell Grants for our neediest students to passing the Children's Health Insurance Program to strengthening our Navy. Ted was a partner who always sought solutions, and with Ted, the debate was never personal. After you would debate him vigorously on the Senate floor, he would walk over to the other side of the aisle, clap you on the back, and say, "How did I do?" But what I liked most about Ted was his love of his family and his interest in ours. I will never forget his taking me on a special tour of his Capitol hideaway. Around the room, he had framed pictures of his family and other treasured mementos. And I really knew I had made it when I was invited to tour Ted's secret hideaway in the Capitol. Another time, we talked about our mothers, and Ted told me that he had an out-of-print book written by his mother that he wanted to give my mother. So he asked me what my mother's full name was so that he could sign it to her. And I told him, it's Patricia Rosaline McGuigan Collins. Well, he just roared because you can imagine how he loved my mother's Irish heritage. He signed the book. And it was such a special moment for me and for my mother. Well, it's very tempting to continue with many more of my treasured memories about Ted, but I realize that is not why we are here today. And I'm looking forward to hear my colleagues talk about their journeys to leadership. I'd like to tell you a little bit about mine. First, I was blessed with great roles in public service. Both my mother and my father served as mayor of my hometown of Caribou, Maine. My father served in the state senate, and my mother was the chair of the University of Maine System Board of Trustees, a very big job. They taught me early on that you had no right to complain if you weren't willing to be involved. In Washington, the legendary trailblazer Margaret Chase Smith was senator the entire time that I was growing up. Although I did not realize it at the time, a meeting that I had with her when I was a senior in high school was in many ways the first step in my journey to the United States Senate. And today I sit at Senator Smith's desk on the Senate floor. Now, my journey to the United States Senate was not an easy one. In 1994, I decided to run for governor of Maine, even though my last elected office was president of the student council at Caribou High School. Although any political pundit would note that I did not have the money or the name ID to run for public office, I felt that my experience as a cabinet member in Maine, as head of the SBA for New England, and my 12 years working for another great role model, Bill Cohen, had prepared me and that I could make a difference. I won a grueling 8-way Republican primary to become the first woman nominated by a major political party to run for governor of Maine. Then came the general election, and I lost. In fact, I got clobbered, actually. I finished third in a 4th-way race. I will forever be grateful to the Green Party candidate who ran and prevented me from finishing dead last. By the way, the winner of that race was my colleague in the Senate, Angus King. Now, there's an important lesson here for all of us, and that is your opponent one day can be your close ally the next. And Angus is definitely that for me. After the 1994 campaign, I was exhausted, I was broke, I was uninsured, and I was unemployed. I was at the humiliating point where I was going to have to ask my parents to borrow some money to pay my mortgage. Fortunately, I was offered a job at Hudson University in Bangor almost immediately. And I had learned so much from the experience of running for office. I met wonderful people all over the state. I increased my knowledge of issues and of the state, and I had conducted my campaign with integrity. Now, not all of the lessons that you learn when you run for public office are pleasant ones. And I will have to say that one that surprised me at the time was learning that women were held to different standards than men were. I remember, and you see this with Hillary Clinton all the time, that there were constantly reporters who wrote about what I wore rather than what I said. I found that women faced barriers that their male counterparts do not. Why this came as a shock to me is a whole nother question, but perhaps it's because I had such a strong mother. One incident at a campaign event in 1994 really summed it all up. A young banker came up to me and he said, "You know, Susan, I agree with you on all of the important issues, but I just can't imagine a woman running the state of Maine." And I was so shocked that he thought that, but I was even more shocked that he said it, and that he said it to me. It really was extraordinary. Well, after I went to work for Hudson for about 14 months, a job that I truly enjoyed, the unexpected happened. In 1996, then Senator Bill Cohen announced that he would not seek re-election. My phone instantly began ringing off the hook, and not just from family and friends, but from people I had met on the campaign trail in 1994. I'll never forget a call from an older woman in Lewiston. She called me up, told me that she hadn't voted for me in 1994, but that I'd been such a gracious loser that she wanted to vote for me and hoped that I would win. Now, part of me said that I just couldn't do it. I couldn't take the risk again. I couldn't afford it. I just couldn't go through a hard campaign with no idea how it would come out. I couldn't take the risk of losing again. But another part of me said, I don't want, at age 85, to be sitting in my rocking chair and saying, oh, if only I'd taken the risk, if only I'd believed in myself. Well, fortunately, that part of me won the debate, and in 1996, I was the one who celebrated on election night as the voters handed me a narrow victory. And since then, I've been reelected 3 times, each time with greater margins. And in 2014, I was reelected with 68.4% of the vote. I also learned on the campaign trail how important role models are. I'll never forget in my 2008 election, the 8-year-old daughter of my chief of staff, who had grown up only knowing Olympia Snowe and myself as senators, asking her father, "Can boys grow up to be senators?" Now, since that first win, I've attempted to recruit many other women to run for public office. And time and again, I see smart, accomplished women saying that they're just not quite ready. And Lynn Martin, a former Congresswoman and Secretary of Labor, describes the self-doubt that so many women have this way. A woman thinks that she needs a PhD in economics to discuss trade policy. A man merely thinks he needs to sell Hondas. And I think there's actually a real element of truth in that, and that we women need to have more confidence in ourselves. We are ready. The women in the Senate today span the ideological spectrum. And just like men, we have different views on different issues, and nothing offends me more than when people think that we all have the same views, care about the same issues, and think alike. But although it is dangerous to generalize, I believe that our life experiences tend to produce a more collaborative, pragmatic, and problem-solving approach. And that was demonstrated, as Senator Mikulski said, when the women of the Senate led the way to ending the disastrous 2013 shutdown. Thanks to Senator Mikulski, we share a special bond that is forged by similar experiences as women in public life and are coming together for our legendary dinners. By the way, after one of our dinners, I was riding on the subway over for a vote, and one of the senior males in the Senate said to me, "I hear that you women got together again last night." And then he said to me with a look of utter puzzlement on his face, "What do you talk about?" And I smiled sweetly, and I told him we were planning the coup. And I kind of like where Barbara and I are sitting today, don't you think, in the two leaders' desk. But the fact is, achieving leadership positions, regardless of whether it's in politics or in any other field, does not require a coup, but rather a commitment. So I thank you all for coming together today to reaffirm our commitment to encourage and to support the next generation of women leaders. Thank you so much.
I have said since I was a young girl, if women ruled the world, we would have a lot more peace and get a lot more done. We are problem solvers, and our recent speakers all prove that beyond measure. Thank you very much. Senator Warren, do you need to leave? And if you do, we want to say a big thank you to you for being here and taking the time. We begin now with our first panel, so please welcome back and take your seats here, if you will, Senator Barbara Mikulski, Senator Collins. Also, I'd like to introduce you to Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, the first woman senator from the Aloha State. Senator Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas, the youngest woman elected to the Senate at the age of 38. And moderating this panel is my friend and colleague, Alison King, who is an experienced, rightfully honored political reporter at NECN. She has reported on 6 presidential races, including this one, and a wide range of political stories here in our state. Alison King.
Okay, am I on here? Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Mrs. Kennedy, for having me here. This is such an honor to be sitting on this little stage here with these women. I wish my 11-year-old daughter were here, not in school today, so she could see these women in action. Just a minute about being in this building and in this room. I covered Senator Kennedy pretty extensively, I'd say for the last 15 years of his life, and I even did a documentary with him, I want to say a few years before he passed. And one part of the documentary was that I spent an entire day with him. So I started before breakfast and we went through the end of the entire day. And it was really remarkable to see him in action. Of course, I knew a lot about him and read a lot about him, but to see him in his element, in the Senate, in his environment. And, I was kind of determined to find a Republican to kind of, say some really nasty things about him, because that'd be good for the story. And I talked to a bunch of senators. I remember talking to Senator Enzi, Senator Hatch, and all these Republicans, and everyone, while they might have wildly disagreed with some of his positions, loved the guy. It was just, and it was very clear to me, how his ability to reach across the aisle was just remarkable in terms of creating friendships, as you described, Senator Collins. But anyway, I also was exhausted at the end of that day, and he was still going 100 miles an hour, which was really annoying. But anyhow, I also wonder a lot what Senator Kennedy would have to say. I often think, gee, I wonder what Senator Kennedy would be thinking of this particular issue, or what he might say, because he was always so out there with his thoughts. And I wonder what he would be thinking of this presidential election, but we'll get to that in a little while. So it's an honor to be a part of this forum, especially to be on stage with all of you, of course. So these are all trailblazers. I Googled all of them and read about them. They've all had pretty big disappointments and defeats in their, certainly starting out, and came back and became sort of trailblazers and going on to break barriers. So I find that really inspiring. So anyway, let's just jump in with this. This panel is called 20 and Counting. So let's start with that. 20 senators in the United States Senate right now. Now, you only have to go back to the 70s to remember that there were no women in the Senate. When I grew up, when I was in middle school and in high school, there were no role models in the Senate. I want to start out maybe with Senator Mikulski to just say, how are we doing? We're now up to 20. Good, bad, where are we?
Well, I think, first of all, we're doing better. When I came to the United States Senate, as I said, there was only Senator Nancy Kassebaum and me. I was the first Democratic woman elected in her own right. That meant that some poor guy didn't die so I could get the job. There had been previous Democratic women. Muriel Humphrey, for example, succeeded Hubert. But though I was the first, I wanted to be the first of many. And that meant really recruitment, going around to people who were potential candidates, to really be able to speak up and encourage people to run for the Senate. Women were running for state rep, for city council, where I got stuck, but they were hesitant to run statewide. Why? First, the money chase. It's a lot, it takes a lot. And they said, can I raise the money? Then second, an issue that Senator Collins raised, am I qualified? No man asked if he's qualified. They don't. They just think that whatever they've done is prologue to being a senator. And I believe that the way we get more women into the United States Senate is start with grassroots. You need to be involved in high school. You need to be involved in college, even in community efforts. Volunteer in campaigns, see what it's like, and then pick a race where you can win based on sweat equity, where grassroots, knocking on doors do it, and it's the path to getting to the Senate. But start at the grassroots, make a difference at the grassroots, and then those grassroots grow up to help you become elected in the Senate.
Thank you, Senator Mikulski. I want to also say, all of you, this is a discussion, so please feel free to jump in. And, another question that I'll ask maybe Senator Hirono down there, we haven't heard from you yet. Is there a correct number of women that should be in the Senate? Are you looking for, is there a bar to reach?
I say the sky's the limit. We've had maybe 45 women elected in their own right to the United States Senate in the entire history of our country. And 20 of us are serving now, so you can see that women being elected to the U.S. Senate is a relatively recent development. And so we are doing better. I had the opportunity to say hello to Senator Paul Sarbanes just a couple of nights ago, because his son, John Sarbanes, and I had gotten elected to the U.S. House in the same year. And Paul Sarbanes said that, you know that book, 9 and Counting? Back then when he was in the Senate, he said he was talking with a group of the women who were in the Senate at that time, far fewer than now. And he said he asked that group of women, when are you going to stop? And he asked me, are you going to stop at 50? And I said, why stop there? It never stop the guys. So that's what we need to do. And you know what? I don't want to keep going on and on, but we all have very different backgrounds. We all have stories to tell. And mine is, as an immigrant, my mother brought me to this country to create a better life for us. And she showed me through her example of courage running away from an abusive husband, my father, who I never got to know, that one person can make a difference. And she showed me that. But with the women in the Senate, I get to work with some extraordinary people to truly move the ball.
Senator Lincoln, why is it so difficult for women to be elected? I mean, what, in your experience, what are the biggest hurdles?
Well, I think, you know, everyone's talked, and certainly Senator Mikulski's mentioned money, resources. It's tough. I mean, when I first ran for the U.S. House in 1991, first of all, no one expected a single young woman to jump into that race, particularly in an old boy network in the eastern half of Arkansas. So raising money was impossible. Luckily, my uncle had been the mayor, and he told me, he said, you've got to raise the money. He said, and you have to save 95 cents out of every dollar you raise to spend in the last 3 weeks, which I thought, that's impossible, but he was absolutely right. You know, there's a lot of money that you can waste on things, but you have to be focused on what it is you want to do. I think many of us felt very compelled to run, but I would just tell you that a lot of people, and I know probably many of my colleagues here on the dais, people have asked them to run. No one ever asked me to run, ever. And don't wait. Don't wait on people to ask you to run, because it just, well, particularly in the South, it didn't happen. And, you know, I had 4-way primaries, I had runoffs. I never ran unopposed. But you cannot wait for people to ask you, because they just simply aren't gonna in many instances. And I think that's really important. So having the courage and the idea that you really can make a difference, and there's things that you can do that can change the world. And there are. Every one of you's got something in you that can change this world. And it doesn't have to be running for the Senate. You could just be running for, you know, party director, or working in the polls, or running in state offices, or anywhere you can make a difference. I just was raised, as Mazie was, by some very strong women who said the sky's the limit. So, you know, do whatever you want, and, you know, don't look back. And that's what you have to do. I think that's really critical. But the money can still be an issue.
Just add one point on why it matters that we're now up to 20 women in the Senate. I was part of that group that authored the book 9 and Counting. Back in those days, we did not have enough women to have a woman on every committee in the Senate. That matters. Now there is a woman on every committee. And as Natalie said earlier, there are women leading those committees, and that does make a difference.
Senator, you talked about being held to a different standard. You're talking about what you wear. Are you still feeling that in 2016?
I'll tell you what I think happens in the Senate, and I don't know whether my colleagues will agree or not. When women are elected to the Senate, I believe that they still have to prove that they belong there. Once they get through some initial test, then they're accepted and they're a member of the club. Men don't face that barrier. It is assumed if a male is elected to the Senate that he belongs there. And I hate to say it, but I think that testing period for women still exists today.
I think you're right that there still is that test, and I don't mind taking tests. I'll just tell you, when I first ran, I was told not to wear pants. I went to a National Women's Political Caucus, used to train, and I went to the training session in 1991. And the only thing they told me was to bring a spare pair of pantyhose, lipstick, and a fresh blouse. That was it. That was the coaching. And it was interesting because I wasn't prepared for that. And I went out on the campaign trail in Arkansas, and I got to tell you, pants were not allowed. To be taken seriously, I had to have on a woman's suit. And you know what? I didn't care. If that was the test, that was the test. And then I find myself in a debate where the men were running the debate, and they decided it was cool to sit on stools. And I called about 2 weeks ahead and said, you know, I'm going to be wearing a suit, and I don't want to sit on a stool because I'll be up above and the audience is down there. And do you know, they made me stand through that entire debate next to my stool. And I said, well, you know what? Knock yourself out. That's what, if that's how you want to do this. And then somebody said, well, why are you standing? And I said, because I requested not to use stools, but they insisted that we do. And I don't think it's inappropriate for me as a woman to sit on this stool. There are ways, I mean, you take those tests and you knock them out of the park. And that's what does it.
There is a real difference when a woman runs for the chief executive office of a state, or in Hillary's case, for the country. And Susan and I know this because I was the first Democratic nominee to be running for governor of the state of Hawaii. When you're running for the CEO position, different attitudes come out that I never faced, even when I was running for the US Senate. Those attitudes really are summed up when Susan said, I just can't imagine a woman being the governor of the state of Hawaii, or I can't imagine a woman running the country. Those attitudes exist, friends. And Swanee and Barbara, you know through your research that there's a real difference in running for the chief executive office of a company, or, well, you don't run for that, but in elected office.
Okay, great. Moving on to another topic. The approval ratings for Congress are at their lowest point ever, I believe. And most people perceive that really nothing is getting done in the Congress, that there's no bipartisanship. You know, how accurate do you feel that assessment is, and what is really going on? I'll leave it to anyone there. Senator Mikulski or Senator Lincoln?
I'll just make a comment, and it goes back to the last question. You know, I think all of these women here are doing their level best to be bipartisan and to work together. But I think one of the things that we are losing in the Senate is the decorum. And decorum creates respect. So I felt pretty strongly about taking that test, but you learn things from tests too. And one of the things that I learned was that you had to have an appearance, and you did need to have a self-confidence that came with some of that appearance. And so when you go into the Senate, there are rules about what we can wear and how you're supposed to behave. They only serve water and milk. That was, I think, started when the milk lobby was pretty heavy. But we discovered, during the impeachment trial, we discovered that because you couldn't leave your desk. But coming to work, looking nice, being respectable, I learned it because I had 2-year-old twins when I came to the Senate. And, you know, on a Friday we didn't have votes. I went and took them I volunteered as a chaperone for a field trip. And then they called a vote, and I ran in, and I had to borrow one of the doorkeeper's jackets because you had to have a coat, and I had on tennis shoes, which are not allowed. And so I got reprimanded. I made my vote and I left, and I thought about it, and I didn't get angry. I thought, you know, it is true. Decorum is something about being respectful of others, but also being respectful of yourself. Coming to work looking as if you are confident and that you are prepared and ready to do the job. And I think that some of that we're losing is that just simple decorum that creates respect. I don't know, you ladies may have a different, but please.
Well, decorum does make a difference, and we see it now in the presidential debate, and we also see it in what began to happen in the congressional floor. But I think we're at a disapproval rating for 2 reasons. Number 1, people feel that we don't listen. Then number 2, that we're too busy spending time listening to ourselves than listening to the people. The second is gridlock and deadlock, where the very rules of this institution, the Senate, that was used to protect a minority viewpoint, it's now been used for obstructionism. Now, let's go to Elizabeth Warren for a minute. So Elizabeth, as you know, is a champion for consumer protection. You know that she was nominated to be the head of consumer protection. You also know that she was stymied in that and could not get a vote to be confirmed. Well, you know that process, but I remember when I saw the end of her ability to be head of the Consumer Protection Agency, there was a group of us. I called her and said, don't get mad, get elected. Don't get mad, get elected. And I will use that because there are a lot of very good people whose names are not being put forth that the president has nominated. What is now happening with the Supreme Court is there. And it's really where the rules are being used to stop things moving ahead. Our greatest successes have occurred when the process worked, where we actually, because the institution has ways for conflict resolution. We talked about where we don't always agree. The debates, 9 amendments on Lilly Ledbetter. We debated them, and then we voted on them, and then majority ruled, not 60 votes, but the majority. We need to get back to what we call the regular order. Now, much is made about when women are in charge, and they ought to. Now, yes, the Republicans are in charge. I just gave an example about what's happening with the Aging Committee. It's running very, very well. But back when we were in charge, and it's not that, I chaired the Barbara Boxer chaired the Environment and Public Works Committee. She teamed up with Senator Inhofe, a very, very, very conservative Republican who doesn't believe in climate change. But yet they were able to produce legislation where women were in charge, working with the men. We were able to move legislation. You know why? Civility. We actually went to the home states of our male counterparts. I have an appropriation, Senator Shelby of Alabama. I went to Alabama to see the issues he was involved with so that I would know. I listened to the people of Alabama so I could listen to him. We found a way that if you disagree on 15 things, but you agree on 5, start with the 5 and get them done.
Absolutely.
Then maybe you can get to 10, and pretty soon you work this out. We must be willing to get to know each other as people. This has been the most important thing about the dinners. We've gotten to know each other as people. They say, what do you talk about? We talk about everything from issues to what to do to carry the new technology. I don't know about you. I don't want to carry an iPhone around my belt and my hips. If there's one thing I don't want in life is to add to my hips. Okay? So we talk about the practical things and so on. But one is getting to know each other as people and not demonizing and not destroying. And this is what I think is really one of the most important. And I think if we got back to it, and I have to go to the media. I love the media, I love the First Amendment, I love all that. But now the more outrageous you are, the more you are rewarded. The more outrageous you are, the more you are rewarded to be on TV or to be on radio. And they don't put sensible comments, rational arguments, civilly disputed ideas. The more outrageous you are, the more likely you are to get attention. And I think that destroys it, and it destroys the moderates, and without the moderates, the center cannot hold.
I want to add to what Barbara just said. A real phenomenon that is contributing to the low ratings of Congress is that people within the body are denigrating the institution. I cannot imagine Ted Kennedy denigrating the Senate, which he so loved. Well, if you hear over and over again from this group of people in the Senate that we're, quote, not doing anything, that everybody's corrupt, that everybody's on the take, after a while, that repeated and magnified many times by social media and by television shows that have a certain ideological bent starts to influence public perception, when in fact, last year was an extraordinarily productive year, but nobody knows that. We rewrote in a bipartisan way, due to Patty Murray and Lamar Alexander, the No Child Left Behind Act, the Major Education Act. We passed a 5-year highway bill for the first time in many years. We passed a budget for the first time in many years. We passed provisions that are absolutely essential to small businesses, tax incentives to help them invest and create more jobs. We increased biomedical research by $2 billion, the largest increase since 2004. How many people here know that? I bet no one, or virtually no one, knows that. And it's because that story is being blocked by this veil of negativism, and also by people within the institution trashing the institution. So I think that is
It was 15 years, too, since we'd done ESEA.
exactly.
Is the gridlock not as bad as people say it is?
That is my belief. Okay. If you look at the major legislation passed last year, a lot of major bills made it all the way through. The president signed them, but you don't hear about them. And each one of them was bipartisan. Each one of them represented Democrats and Republicans coming together to increase NIH's budget by $2 billion, to rewrite the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That's just lost in this very negative environment that we're in.
And we're about to pass a pretty important energy bill that took two women, Lisa Mikulski of Alaska and Maria Cantwell, ranking member of Washington State. And we haven't had a major energy bill since 2007 or thereabouts. I'm totally convinced that when women are chairing the committees, we get things done. And it's been said a couple of times by a number of people this morning that women are problem solvers. I think that says a lot in terms of our frame of reference, our orientation. We want to get things done. There's not a lot of testosterone that we, that's not what drives us. And I think too often that level of discourse that we see too often in the Senate is what gets the news. But the hard work of getting things done have often been done by the women of the Senate. And the two women we have here are prime examples.
Oh, you do? Okay.
If you could excuse me.
Okay, absolutely. Senator Collins needs to catch a plane and unfortunately has to leave us now. But
Thank you very much.
thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful hearing from you.
In the real Senate, that's right.
So I know we're going to want to go into a Q&A portion at some point, but I do want to touch on the presidential race. I mean, everyone seems to be, whether they're political or not, seems to be talking about the presidential race. And many people are very, very concerned, the people I speak with every day on the campaign trails and whatnot, about who our next president is going to be. And I'm curious to know how concerned you all are about who our next president is going to be. And I'm going to let anyone jump in. And maybe I'll even ask Senator Mikulski to start this one off.
But why don't we start and go down this way?
Okay, all right, we'll start down. Senator
Mazie.
Hirono?
Go ahead, Mazie.
Well, of course I'm concerned about a presidential election where a candidate can say that no Muslim should be able to come into our country, or who speaks in a way that I think really speaks to the fears and people are afraid in this country, and any race that really speaks to that as opposed to let's move our country forward, it's a concern. And I think the level of discourse on the side of, I will say this, on the Republican side is really distressing. And yet, you know, it's not as though this happened by chance. It's been developing to the point where a major candidate can stand up and say those things. And you know, the other thing is that on our side, if Hillary Clinton had the kind of resume that Marco Rubio has, no offense, she wouldn't even be deemed, I think, having the kind of experience that we need. And she certainly couldn't be talking the way that Donald Trump has been talking about, let's build a wall because, hey, the Chinese did it. It's just amazing. And however, this is, as far as I'm concerned, a rather bizarre election that we've come to this pass as a country, and we are divided in that way, and it's not a good thing. So I think that we ought to continue to talk about how important it is that we have a level of civility, that we talk about issues, that we talk about the true concerns of the people of this country.
Senator Lincoln?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to what both Barbara and Sue have talked about already, and that is expectations. You know, the electorate, the expectation now is that it's a reality TV show. It's not talking about the issues necessarily. It's who can outscream the other person, or you know, what happens in those reality TV shows. So, and I think that that's why people miss the good things that the United States Senate has been doing, and the Congress as well. I mean, whether it's WRDA or ESEA or a budget or so many other things that are getting done, they're not sexy. They're just not sexy issues necessarily, but they're essential to making this country great and to making it strong, to educating our children and to making sure that the next generation is prepared to do what we want them to do, to feed our children. I mean, a farm bill, you know, all of those things need to happen, and we need to realize that maybe they aren't just sexy issues. And I think that's critical. But I just want to elevate what Barbara Mikulski said, and I think it is absolutely important, and that is finding common ground. We have talked forever about compromise. Nobody wants to admit to compromise. And that's not what you want to be asked to do. What we have to say here is that we've got to find the common ground. Barbara reached for common ground, and that she was always productive, always has been productive, always will be productive. I reached out to Saxby Chambliss when I was chairman of the Ag Committee and said, where do we agree? And let's work out. And when we get to those outward boundaries, then you've seen where you agree, so you respect one another about where your differences are. And you get that done in the middle, just like Barbara and Richard Shelby do. Those are critical places. And the one thing I fear is that people will not know how good Hillary Clinton was at that. When Hillary Clinton came to the Senate, there was grumbling on the Republican side about how, oh, she's going to be a diva. She's going to have all of this Secret Service, blah, 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 blah. She's going to, you know, don't you remember, Barbara?
I remember.
And she came in there day one. She came in there day one with ideas. She came down to the floor with paper. She didn't come to the Democratic side. She went to the Republican side. And she sat down with members and said, you know, what here can we get done together? And she can be a facilitator as our commander-in-chief. She's got the, you know, I don't have to tell this crowd what credentials she has. I mean, you can see it. But I think it's important for people to talk and to empower her to be able to be seen in that way. And I know, I mean, Hillary, although she didn't grow up in Arkansas, she surely lived in Arkansas. And she knew what I knew about the expectations that many people might have of her. And so she's, you know, she's balancing all of that to really try to be the kind of candidate that can prove to people that she's got the capacity to do this, and she does. I know I watched her. I know Barbara and others did too, in really working together to get things done. And you know, I think that, you know, in this election, I can't believe he's the last one over there on the other side, but John Kasich, who balanced a budget working with Bill Clinton and moderate Democrats in the House. But people don't want to see that. We have to help encourage the electorate to see what can happen when we get things done. I think that's most important, and I think Hillary's trying to do it.
I mean, have we grossly underestimated the amount of anger that's out there?
So, full disclosure, I'm absolutely for Hillary for president, and that's where my presidential choice is. So we start with it. But I want to talk about two things. The importance of the presidency and the importance of the way we choose the president. And they're tied together. Because you not only have to win, you have to govern. You have to win, but the other part of that is you have to govern. You win to govern. You don't win to win. This isn't the Super Bowl where you get to wear the ring and the sweatshirt and you get to do it. You win to govern. So when we look at the President of the United States continues to be the leader of the free world. The President of the United States is the President of the United States, which is the indispensable nation. And you can see that in the work of John Kerry, working with President Obama to do a serious ceasefire, to what we're doing around the world, to the empowerment of women and girls around the world, to what we're facing in our own economy. You need a President of the United States. You need a president who can win. You need a president that can govern. And you need other institutions that are co-equal branches but do govern. Now, when we look at the presidency, you need one president at a time. You don't have 435 presidents from the House, 100 presidents in the United States Senate. We give advice. Sometimes we give consent, but they have to govern. The president has to also follow the Constitution. Like Article 2, Section 2 says, the president shall nominate a member of the Supreme Court where there is a vacancy. You need a president on our domestic problems. It is the year 2016. When we were going into the year 20,000, I thought, a new century, a new millennium, a new way. I thought we were going to say goodbye to war. I thought we were going to say goodbye to genocide. It was the dawn of the digital age. I'm from the rotary phone generation. I was so excited about this. And now we have run into really where that when you were president, it seems the job is to oppose the president, neither to try to find compromise. Compromise has become a dirty word or a dysfunctional word. I believe you can compromise without capitulation. You don't have to give up your identity. You don't have to give up your principles, but you can compromise by finding common ground. The presidency is important. We need to be a strong country. We need to be a smart country. We need to get back to making things. We need a president. But in order to govern, you have to have a process that does it. I don't know about you, but I am really concerned about the vulgarity that this presidential campaign has descended into. Vulgarity gives permission for violence and for bullying. Bullying. I no longer want to look at my Twitter account. I used to love it, to be in touch with the people, to hear what they have to say to me, good, bad, or whatever. What the hell? Put it all out there. But you know what? My Twitter responses now are so violent. They are so vulgar, I don't even want to look at them anymore. So instead of being a voice to the people and a voice back from the people, it is really scary. And if you're a woman member of the Congress, it even gets more anxiety producing. And I don't even want to go into that. And now look at the way the race has been covered. Is it substantive debate? Can you tell me who in the Republican Party is for the flat tax and what the consequences of the flat tax would be? You need revenue to run a government, whether you're paying for defense or non-defense. Do you know that? Who here knows which Republican candidate is for that? Who here would be for some of the big issues? College affordability. Do you know what their college affordability is? You know, Hillary and Bernie have outlined it, and I'm not pushing the Democrats. I'm pushing the way they're campaigning. And it is strong, and it's even sharp clashes. That's terrific. That's the way it ought to be. Do you know college affordability? No. Do you know, besides building a wall, how are we going to get jobs back to the United States of America? And we forget that when you're on CNN, the world is watching us. So not only are we watching it, but so is the Ayatollah. So is North Korea. If you're an ally, do you want to stick with us? And if you're a foe, are you sizing us up? We've got to get back to, and it goes to what I'm saying, the more vulgar, the more violent, the more of a character you are, that's what you get covered. You don't get covered if you have character. You get covered if you are a character. And I think this is really consistent, because if we demean the process of choosing a president, we demean the presidency itself. And I think we all need to take a pause and reflect on that. And quite frankly, I think the media has to own up to what its responsibility is in this. So, enough said.
I think we're going to move to the audience question portion of this, and I'm not sure who is. We've got microphone. Great. Okay. Are there any questions of the senators? Oh, we've got one over here. Or is there one over here as well? No. Great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here, and I'm so happy to hear about your experiences. My name is Robin Gibson, and I wanted to comment or ask a question. How are the women of the Senate going to make their work and their take on the issues palatable to the mainstream, and especially young people?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat, how are the women of the Senate going to make
take their issues, their point of view on the issues, and their work, such as you had talked a little bit about the passing tax incentives for jobs, like the nature legislation, things that we did not know about. How are you going to make that more palatable to the mainstream in terms of if we have people who are more into social media and hyping up things that are not really great for us to know about? How are you going to take what you're doing in the same vein of social media viral or making it more palatable to young people?
more appealing to young people?
I don't think I understood the question.
Okay.
I think what you want to know is how women of the Senate are going to take out to the electorate and to other young women the issues that need to happen. Is that right? Is that what you're saying? I think one of them is sharing experiences. You know, Senator Mikulski spent a lot of her early life as a social worker and also as a college professor. You know, I came to the Senate with twin 2-year-olds. I gave birth in the house, and let me tell you, they didn't know what to do with me then. I can promise you. But you know, what was amazing was to be able to talk about those experiences. Barbara could talk about them in terms of her social work in Baltimore and her work with the city council. You know, lots of times when I would go to the Senate Finance Committee and we would talk about like after-school programs. You know, we were trying to increase some of the funding for after-school programs. Olympia Snow and I were the only women on there. I had small children. One of the senators, great guy, loved him dearly, thought that their grandparents should just be taking care of them, you know, while their mamas were working. Things like that. You know, the experiences that we have and the things that we feel passionate about, you're right, we express those, but hopefully those are some things that identify with you all. The school nutrition programs, I mean, those were hugely important to me. I had kids in the public schools, and as chairman of the Ag Committee, I was able to really make a difference in passing that nutrition bill. First time since 1973 that we had increased federal funding for school feeding programs. But Jay Rockefeller was great when we did our press conference and I had all these little elementary kids dressed up as vegetables and fruits. He was like, "Oh my God, this is great." And I said, "Yes, it is, it's great." Kids are gonna get, more nutritious foods and we're gonna spend more money on it. But I think bringing that awareness is something that we all have an opportunity to do, and we need you. We need you to help.
Could I ask you, are you asking how do we communicate with you? I really didn't understand your question.
Oh, I thought it was examples, sorry.
Okay, so this goes to being a member of the Congress. You
part
don't
of
pay attention to us. You pay attention to executive branch people and to individuals. There's no judgment behind what I'm saying. So do you ever go to our websites? This is, again, not a judgment. I don't believe you do. I believe you go to what you see and you go to what you know. I bet you cover Senator Warren. I bet you cover Ed Markey because you're Massachusetts people. Of course you're interested in them. And then when you see people on TV, you do. You're always going to cover the First Lady, then the 20 of us. But I would really encourage you, go to our .govs. We do put out ideas. Now, we don't put ideas out as a group because it's what I said. We're not a caucus, we're a force. But we do put out our individual ideas, like on college affordability, that we would be articulating, one of which, of course, is led by Senator Warren. The ability for you all as students to be able to refinance your loans. We think you ought to be able to refinance your student loan in the same way people can refinance their car or their mortgage. Right now, the government makes money off of students, charging as much as 8 or 9%. Refinance, reform the Pell Grants, but it's on our web. We do use social media. Go look at us, go down us in alphabetical order. You'll really like it. And when you get to the H's and M's, you're going to be
there are any number of sources for information, but as a Democrat, one of my ongoing concerns and challenges has been how we as Democrats communicate what we're doing. And it's been expressed that what we do is, Republicans are really actually very good at communicating in a simple way that gets to people's emotions, which is how people vote, by the way, not by analytical. The Democrats do a really good job of listing the 20 things that we all should care about, that we care about, that you all should care about. That is not making much of an impression on people. So my message has been for the number of caucuses that we've had where we've wrung our hands about how is it that the party that really cares about Social Security, middle-class families, income inequality, economic inequality, all of that, we're not the ones that are able to convey that in a way that reaches people's emotions. This is why when we got on the Supreme Court issue and came up with do your jobs, we were so happy because we were able to say in 3 words what it usually takes us 20 things of things that we all should be care about. So I think part of it is our challenge to communicate what we're doing in a way that really strikes people in an emotional chord, not to manipulate them emotionally, but to understand that people make decisions based on their hearts, their emotions, not their heads.
I know the time is coming to a close. I would, in behalf of all of us, we'd like to, and I know Senator Collins and Senator Warren as well. Vicki, we want to thank you for the opportunity, this idea of coming here for Women's History. We really hope that you all got a lot out of it. I would like to, because I'm coming to the end of my Senate career, just say, if I could, one quick story about Senator Kennedy and bipartisanship and making a difference. When I came to the United States Senate, women were not included in the protocols at NIH. So if you went to one of the greatest esteemed institutions in the world, women were not in the protocols. Whether it was heart disease, brain disease, and certainly cancer, I could go through them. Famous study, take an aspirin a day, keep a heart attack away, included 10,000 male medical students, not one woman. Joining on a bipartisan basis with the support of Ted Kennedy and Tom Harkin, I, along with, supported by Nancy, with Pat Schroeder, Olympia Snow, and Connie Morello of Maryland, we showed up at NIH. And we demanded that they review this based on scientific principles, and we got in it. At the same time, George Bush the Elder appointed Bernadine Healy as the head of NIH. As we worked together to get her confirmed, and again, a Republican woman, an esteemed doctor, Dr. Healy said this to me: Barbara, we women are overlooked. And working with Ted and Tom, we established the Office of Women's Health at NIH. We did it together. Then Dr. Healy said, I want to do a study on hormone replacement. I want to do a longitudinal study, but I can't go through the budget process. You all don't earmark. Can you help it out? Ted, Tom, Arlen Specter, Barb Mikulski, we don't, to this day, I don't know if Bernadine Healy was a Democrat or a Republican. We put our heads together. We got the money for NIH under the leadership of Dr. Healy. Let me tell you the outcome of that story. Because of that one study, we changed clinical practice. And guess what? The change in clinical practice has resulted in breast cancer rates going down 15%. So when you say, what did the women of the Senate do? For us, it's never about girls versus boys. It was about guys and girls together for the good of the country. It wasn't about being a Democrat or a Republican. It was about breast cancer. And when we work together, we've saved lives 1 million at a time. That's really what it is.
Senator Hirono, Senator Lincoln, Senator Mikulski, thank you so much for being here, and loved hearing from all of you. Thanks so much, and thank you, Mrs. Kennedy.
Senators, thank you. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Senators, thank you on behalf of everybody that's associated with this organization and the people who have come to hear the good things you had to say. We're just going to take a 15-minute break in an effort to get back on track in time, so come back quickly.